Hello, namaste, and a very good evening to all the viewers. Where the mind is without fear and the head is held high, where knowledge is free, where the mind is led forward by thee into ever widening thought and action, into that heaven of freedom, my Father, let my country awake. These words of Rabindranath Tagore so eloquently describe an India of our dreams, an India that is a crowning glory of this earth. Are we on the path towards seeing this dream coming true? Are we finally witnessing a rising India? Friends, I'm Anjalee Swamy, your RJ and host from Bharat FM and Bharat TV. India has witnessed significant changes in the last few years. You all would agree. India's development is of tremendous interest and importance to Indian residents and humans everywhere. After all, Indians are 1/6 of humanity, right? But these days, when I do a web search regarding India, I encounter mostly a cacophony of negativity about India. So, how is India rising? Today, I will introduce you to three distinguished personalities who have a different story to tell. I'm thrilled to have Rajeev Srinivasan, Nivedita Haran, and Narayanan Komerath on Bharat TV. Rajeev Srinivasan is an adjunct professor of strategy at IIM Bengaluru and comes with a long history of writing about Indian issues. Nivedita Haran is a retired IAS officer who continues to work on projects, recently cleaning up Dal Lake in Srinagar, Kashmir. And Narayanan Komerath is a retired professor of aerospace engineering, joining us from near Atlanta, Georgia, USA. He brings the perspective of someone who has lived outside India for all but 12 years of his life. So we have Nivedita ji, we have Narayanan Komerath, and we have Rajeev Srinivasan. A very, very warm welcome to all of you. I'm thrilled to have you here, and I'm sure our audience, Bharat FM and Bharat TV, will also be delighted to hear you. So, to start with, I want to first of all thank you all for taking your time out and joining us. I want to throw a question out there to all of you, and whoever thinks you want to answer, please go ahead and do that. I wanted to provide your insight into the social changes that are happening, some seen, some unseen in India. And maybe I can direct this question to Narayanan ji. But please, others feel free to provide your insight too.
So just looking back, when I was a schoolboy, experts everywhere were confidently predicting that we brown pagans and heathen had no chance of keeping a democracy going. And at the start of this COVID-19 pandemic, we still saw the same kinds of predictions. 100 million or whatever, huge number of Indians would die in short order. Government, bureaucracy, medical system, people of India are all incompetent, would make a complete mess. And the utter extreme rage, I would say, when India controlled the pandemic far better than any of these very large nations, and now leads the world by a very long way in vaccination. So, we grew up in the 1960s and 70s. And at that time, we fully expected to have to fight in the street, as we were always under threat of being invaded. Every 2 years or so, we would have famine, riots. The wolf was always at the door, so to speak, vultures circling overhead, and they still are. But yes, happy to see the nuclear missiles. The danger is much deeper and more imminent elsewhere. Look around you. You find absolutely no empathy for the people of India among today's so-called mainstream media, and they are rapidly convincing Indians to also have no empathy for Indians and for their compatriots. It's an absolutely ridiculous situation. But the real story is the transformation that is underway. And it has always been underway for the past 76 years. And now the rate of change is amazing. So this is a story that must be brought out objectively. And I hope we can talk about what has been happening in many areas of human life. I want to understand how this is happening. I hope so do you. And thanks for allowing me to hear from thoughtful and knowledgeable people on this.
Yeah, if I may jump in for a minute, Anjali, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
What Narayan was telling us a minute ago reminded me of two things. One is that there are actual serious changes that are visible to any observers on the ground in India. One is the assertion of what was formerly known as the low caste people. Okay, over the last few years, you see that there are essentially revolutions where people who were once dominated or oppressed or whatever have started asserting themselves, and the result is that the electoral calculus has changed immeasurably. The same thing is true of women. One of the things that I'm sure Nivedita will tell us more about is, the state has now made a lot of things available, especially to women. Okay, see, for instance, something that seems kind of trivial, the provision of cooking gas, right, in cylinders to women means they don't have to go forage for firewood. Okay. Second, the provision of toilets, indoor toilets, has made it possible for women to be less embarrassed. They don't have to go, defecate in the open. And the third, and perhaps probably, I don't know, maybe if I were to place it at the top of the heap, it's water. There's this program called Jal Jeevan that is bringing piped water to millions of people who never had piped water. So these are all, revolutions that are happening on the ground. And the other part I'd like to touch upon very briefly is that, see, there are two Indias. And as you know, anything you say about India is true, and the opposite is also true. When we people talk about India, we're talking about what I would call the PLUs, people like us, the urban, Anglo sphere, English-speaking people. There is an enormous Bharat out there, okay, people who live in the villages mostly, but who are tied into their traditional practices, tied into their traditional culture. And there was a very poignant episode written up by the Gandhian Dharampal some years ago, where he said he was on a train journey and then he ran into this group of pilgrims who were from somewhere near Kanpur in UP. They had gone all the way to Rameshwaram in the south, and they were coming back and they were going to Haridwar. And he asked them, so did you stop in Madras, which is what Madras was called in those days? And they said no. And he said, did you stop in Delhi? And they said no. And he asked them why. These are the showcases of modern India. And they said, we don't have time. What does it mean? They just didn't care. Okay? They didn't care about the things that we people think are important. And my belief is that this Bharat is rising now. So when you talk about India rising, it's not only the India that we know, it's the Bharat that's there as an underlying stream, an eternal stream that's been out there. And that's what I'm very hopeful about. That Bharat is now asserting itself. Okay, so I just wanted to add that perspective.
Absolutely, very true. And yes, I know, Nivedita, this is a question for you before you, I'm sorry, didn't mean to interrupt, but
no, I wanted
to
respond. I wanted to respond to what Rajeev was saying. In fact,
go ahead. Yes,
he's so right. In this, what he said about the execution, the implementation was our weakest link over the last 60 years, 65 years, if you look at it. Because you see, the bureaucracy hadn't changed. We still were brought up with the same mindset as the pre-independence days. Now, that was the biggest flaw that we had in our system. I personally think so. That perhaps is changing. And that is when Rajeev says that providing electricity, water supply, empowering the women, I think that is the change that one sees. And I want to give a small example. I was in Bundelkhand about 3 years back, and the women there actually were cooking with using cooking gas. And I asked them, how has it changed your life? And their simple response was, Madam, ab hame, they don't need to go to the forest to look for, to forage for firewood. That itself, they had to spend 3 hours a day doing that. They had to spend 3 hours to get a pot of drinking water. These are the changes that really have made a difference. So I totally agree with Rajeev.
Actually, to some extent, you already answered, because my question earlier was along those lines. But so, can you tell us some more about this so-called iron frame of the state and this evolution over the last few years that you're talking about? With your experience in Bundelkhand, can you expand on that and tell us a little?
Yes, Anjali. I entered the service in the early 80s. And even then, in the academy, I had this, and I remember sharing this with my father when I spoke to him, that I felt that, that sense of belonging, that sense of positivity was perhaps lacking. And that was perhaps because the selection process, the way we were trained was totally outdated. That, I think, was our downfall in a way. We could have done much, much better. I personally believe so. And therefore, with that change happening, with a lot of pressure from the private sector, I think the bureaucracy is sitting up and learning to listen to the people who are the main stakeholders. And that makes me happy.
Definitely learning from people who are the main stakeholders. Yes, definitely these people are the main stakeholders. But coming back to Narayananji, can you please talk about a little bit more about the first question that I opened this program with, which was the social changes that are happening in some scene, because she's talking about the same people who are the stakeholders, right? So what do you have to say about that?
Well, many things are changing very, very fast. And that's the thing that many people probably have not seen. Every time I go to India, I have to take lessons on how things work, and all the time there are steps back, but there are also larger steps forward. So each time you go in there and you say, "Oh my goodness, these roads are so bad." Well, next time you go there, the roads have improved a little bit, and the next and pollution used to be terrible near where I lived, and that fixed. So things are just they are changing. They have to change slowly because it's not a totalitarian state, etc. So that's what I see, and the changes in every sphere of life. And if you look at anything, you say, why are you doing this way? You will find out that there's a very complicated set of reasons, but then you find that they are actually doing what makes sense. So yeah, that's on a general level. Of course, there are many other things to be said specifically about it. But one more thing that I would add, there seems to be, this is what really impressed me, there seems to be a well-connected progression where these steps are very carefully linked. Things like demonetization, what is that? Hundreds of millions of bank accounts being set up, and these all suddenly contributed now to being able to deal with this pandemic situation in a way that the advanced nations have not been able to do. And this is where the change is becoming very visible.
If I can jump in for a minute there, okay, I want to respond to what both Narayan and Nivedita said. I have to say that I have been prejudiced against the Indian administrative services, because I feel that a lot of the people who went there basically became little, I don't know, little feudal lords where they ruled over the rest of us. And I had an experience teaching some of these mid-level, administrative services people. And one of the things I taught them was the idea of design thinking, which is based on extreme customer centricity. And the bottom line there is you go ask your customers what they need, which was sort of a revelation to many of these administrative services people. It's like, what do you mean ask them? They're like illiterate people, they don't know. And the answer is no, they know their problems, and your solutions have to be appropriate to their problems. And Nivedita alluded to one of them, which is, women in desert regions who have to carry water on their heads for hours a day. And some well-meaning person, I don't know if he was I don't think he was an administrative services officer, but he was an NGO. He said, it's so terrible these women have to walk all this way. I'm going to set up these water repositories, okay, big repositories near the village. And so he did. He spent a lot of money and put these big tanks there. And the women still went all the way to the remote, watering hole they went to. And they found out by asking them, why did they do that? And the answer is that this was their my time or me time, okay? This is where the women would talk to each other. They would exchange gossip, they'd talk about their children, things like that. And they were away from their annoying husbands and children, right? It was important to them, right? So they didn't. So if only somebody had asked them, tell us about the problem there. Why are you doing this, etc. So then somebody figured out another way of, providing similar close-by water services. But he also added a little tweak to that. He provided internet services there. So they could do remote telemedicine, for example. They could go there and have a remote doctor, talk to them, things like that. Then the women started using it. So you have to talk to people, understand them. And another example is the rainwater harvesting. In the first place, when people went to places like the Aravalis in North India, which were being denuded and becoming dry, they started telling them what to do. And then there was one group, I forgot their name, Tarun Bharat Sangh, I think, a group of young people from the cities. They went there and they asked people about their traditional hydrological knowledge. And it turned out they knew a lot, where to put up the check dams. And also they realized that one of the problems was overgrazing. So taking their information and input into account, this group was able to, in fact, green dramatically and turn some of the water bodies and the rivers that had dried up into perennial rivers again. So the point I wanted to make is that, as Nivedita was saying, there are really well-meaning people in the bureaucracy. A lot of them had been thwarted, okay? But now, when they're being given the opportunity to go and actually talk to the people whom they're serving, things are getting a lot better. And one example there, I don't want to, dump on the administrative services. One of the greatest examples of competence in the world, in my opinion, has been the Kumbh Mela. Every now and then you have this enormous, just gigantic, what is it? I don't know, 30 million people or something show up. And it goes without incident. It's beautifully handled, right? So we have the state capacity to do it. If only we are able to direct that in the right way. And then let me also add another point to what Narayan was saying, which is that at the root of many of these things is technology. Okay, and very simply, the smartphone or even the dumb phone, the feature phone, has been turned into a tremendous weapon of development by our people in villages and in towns alike.
So let me
I'm going to
ask
stop
that question. Sorry, Rajeev, but you may have to continue to talk because this question is directed towards you, because you just brought in this topic of technology. Can you please tell a little bit more about how you think that technology is a great equalizer for the Indians?
Yeah. Okay, let me start with the results, if you will, and then let's go into what the technology has enabled. There were two announcements in the recent past. Okay, one was India has hit 1.5 billion vaccinations. I mean, that is unbelievable. It's not million, 1.5 billion. And it turns out that India has vaccinated more people percentage-wise, 90%, than the US, which is 73% in the first vaccination, and similarly better in the second vaccination as well. Now, how did this happen? A lot of it has to do with technology. There was this application called CoWIN, okay, which you just went in on your smartphone and registered yourself, and then it directed you to nearby locations where you could go to a private or a public health center and get your vaccination. So you could do that without any fuss. And secondly, this certificate was available instantly on your phone, and you could print it out, etc. And I was appalled to hear, for example, that in the US, the vaccination certificates in some states were little pieces of paper which were written on. And this classmate of mine who's in the US said he had lost a certificate because somebody had spilled water on it. I'm like, what? America
That
is
is
like that?
That is true.
Yeah, it's
That was
unbelievable.
we had to.
Yeah, but here,
So
the moment
I want to
you get,
go ahead.
go ahead, Narayan.
Yeah, Raju, I wanted to point out how did India manage to do all these things suddenly? Where did all this knowledge come from? I think that for that we had to go back to maybe the IT revolution, which this is really an unprecedented thing in human history, at least since the Saraswati civilization days of international traders, where all these well-educated, mostly young Indians working for Indian companies went all over the world. Not as invaders or con artists, unlike the East India Company, but as professionals doing projects for customers in those countries, living and working under their laws and systems while remaining very Indian. And they returned to India. And there's this whole culture of being able to do things in a very organized manner, I think really came out of there, because I hadn't associated that with the India where I grew up. And suddenly they're able to do these things. And they're not afraid of scaling things up from 10 to 100 to a billion. And they're able to do this. I think, so that is one of those things that no one has realized, that the country has fundamentally changed because they are able to do these things. And what do you think? How much has that played a role in it?
Yeah, and you know what? I think for the first time, people have realized that they need not go and sit in a taluk office or a village office for hours to get a caste certificate. They can get it online. You see, these are the ways in which we can empower people. The direct benefit transfer, which has made such a difference in people's lives, it's enormous. It's not only reduced delay, but it has cut down graft. It has also enabled the government to reach out to the target group one-to-one, which was not possible earlier. I still remember, even under the insurance, work insurance, MNREGS, the people were getting not the wages that were sanctioned by the government, but the thekedar would take his 10 or 20% cut. That cannot happen any longer. So you see, these are the ways in which the people are empowered. And that's what we need in our country. We need it in our country. And I think as the younger generation grows up, this will happen more and more. And I'm sure that the bureaucracy now cannot take the people for granted.
Very true.
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. Let me just add to that. What has happened there, along the lines of what both Narayan and Nivedita said, is that the moment you start digitizing things, okay, it's highly empowering. An example is, land records are very poorly maintained in India, right? You can just go to the local village office and bribe somebody, and Narayan, your land may belong to some, I don't know, Joe Schmo tomorrow because he just bribed him, okay? And at worst, what you can do is you can just burn down the village office, okay? And people have done that, right? Whereas the moment it's digitized, it's impossible to mess with. And this is a huge lesson. And I've seen this over and over again. One example is a trivial example, maybe. It's railway reservations. It used to be a nightmare. You had to go stand in line and you had to pay some money to get a booking. You don't have to do that anymore. You just sit at home and do it. Same thing with things like passports, right? A relative of mine applied for a passport, and can you believe it? It applied online, submitted all the documents. When they got it attested within like half an hour, and 1 week later the passport was in her hand. I mean, this is astonishing, right? I mean, it's unbelievable, and a lot of it is because of technology. I would contest a little bit what Narayan was saying, which is that this knowledge has come in from people working abroad or for companies overseas, but it's also a matter of conscientiousness. I find that the user interface is not as good as it could be, but that's because people are used to working for anonymous companies. But one of the things that's changing now, especially the students that I see, is that many of them are planning to have these are IIM students. They're planning to have a first job with a large company, then they want to do entrepreneurship. Now, this I think is extremely positive, because when you're talking about entrepreneurship, you're saying, I'm going to go find some real need out there. And I think one of you was alluding to farming. Okay, now agriculture could well be one of India's biggest pluses, because we have terrific land, and if it's watered properly, it's going to produce huge output. But one of the things that's held them back is the fact that there is almost no technology being included. One of my student projects recently was on how to bring agricultural produce to remote villages. And one of the things that my students were astonished about is that, the villagers are not as inhibited or technophobic as you think they are. These guys went and talked to the farmers, and the farmers were asking them, look, we don't trust the people who send us the stuff. Can you make some QR code-based mechanism so that we know what we get is authentic? You follow what I'm saying?
Yeah.
They're actively asking for technology, right? And this,
Rajeev, it's both sides. It's both sides. It's not only are the bureaucrats have to accept the technology, but the people need to demand it too. And that comes with not just literacy; it comes with awareness, with empowerment. People need to ask those questions. I remember in 2006-07, we had done a quick survey in Kerala, all of Kerala, and we found that the computers, the fancy computers, and those days, those flat screens and all were very in, and every collector needed one on his or her table. We found that the use of computers and digitization in government work was less than 15%. The rest of the time, the computers and other gadgets were lying either fallow, or they were not even taken out from their boxes. We found that. So you see, this kind of change is happening because the people are demanding. And the people are demanding because I think the knowledge profile, the awareness profile of the people, of the janta, is changing. And that makes a difference.
So Nivedita, let me ask you this, that, from whatever you people are describing, it looks like there is a lot to be upbeat about. So this brings me to this question about the negative media projection about India that I see, and there is a lack of understanding of Hinduism as a religion. They associate Hinduism with Hindutva, nationalism, so on and so forth. And I mean, this is a question to all three of you. I'm not just focusing on you, Nivedita ji, but I'm sure you would agree with me on the negative media projection that has been happening, for the past few years, I would say. So what would you say?
I agree, Anjali. I think the fault lies with with how Hinduism is explained normally or talked about. We have these very deep obscurantists who define and understand Hinduism in a manner which I think nobody these days would understand, and it's actually it's a violation of the Hindu code, the Upanishads. It's nowhere written that this is the way it should be followed. But these are people who believe in it, and they spread this. On the other hand, for the world, we are known as the people who are, the sadhus, the sannyasis, the yogis, who sit up there in the mountains and meditate. But we are neither of these. The common Hindu is something in between. For him, Hinduism is a part of life. It's a way of life. The way we are brought up, the way we think, inclusivity, being able to understand and empathize with a person's problem and aberrations in life. That is Hinduism, and that is something that people need to understand. And people who make us.
I agree. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
no. I just wanted to add a sentence that this, very, very wrong way in which Hindutva is used sometimes in a pejorative sense is actually an insult, because that's not what Hindutva is at all. It is actually some people who are the bigots, the people who don't really understand what Hinduism is. If they interpret Hinduism in that manner, that doesn't change the religion,
Very true, very true. So of late, this Hinduism seems to be equated with rabid nationalism. Narayanan, do you think you could throw some more light on that? Why is that? I think he probably is having some technical.
Okay, let me jump in then. Okay.
Absolutely.
See, I think, Narayan, let me just finish my thought. Okay. See, I think there is a bigger, let's say, fish to catch here. Okay. My belief is that there is geopolitics at play. See, you now see the Americans and the Chinese, they're fighting, to the death, more or less, on all kinds of metrics, right? And both these groups, and I would say generally the West and also China, they both view India as a colony, as a potential colony or a real colony. And the West has never ceased to look at India as one of those suppliers of raw materials and a market for their products, right? The fact that India is now beginning to grow, all the things that we've been talking about for the last half hour or so, this is not something that the West actually wants. They would like India to be in the Vatican's alleged words, barefoot, pregnant, and in the kitchen. That is underdeveloped and underachieving. Okay, that's what they want us to be. And one of the ways they can achieve that is by creating internal fissures and internal fault lines. And I think a lot of this is based on that particular geopolitical desire on the part of certainly the West, as I just described, they want to keep us as colonies, and on the part of China. See, the way China looks at India is a little bit like America used to look at Mexico. You're all familiar with the fact that, about 1/3 of American land today, California, New Mexico, Texas, etc., used to belong to Mexico. And one fine day, America just walked in. For whatever reason, I'm not familiar with the history of that, but they basically took that land. And China has similar ambitions. They want to take our land and keep us under their thumb. And for them, the perspective is 1962 all over again. Can we humiliate the Indians? And, India is not standing idle. For example, all the stuff on the Indo-Tibet frontier, and I intentionally call it the Indo-Tibet frontier because that's not the Chinese frontier. Tibet is a Chinese colony, right? Is intended to keep us down. So I want to quote Chanakya. I may not remember it very well, but he said there are 4 kinds of enemies. And, it's people who are attacking us from outside, people who are internal, who are supported by outsiders. And third is people who are outsiders, who are supported by internals. But the fourth and the worst, he said, is people in-house who are deliberately attacking you. He says they're like snakes in your house that will destroy, your house and your family and so forth. And that's what's going on. Okay, when we talk about a lot of these things, I also want to go back to there is this idea of subnational diplomacy that has been mooted by the Biden administration. And to me, that reads like balkanization. Can we support, these separatists in Punjab or in Bengal or in Tamil Nadu or something, and reach a situation where there is essentially civil war and a color revolution in India. And okay, unfortunately, the regime had to be changed. And let's bring back the same old crowd, the Nehru Gandhi crowd, which has been so helpful in meeting the West's objectives. And let me also point out, there was this BRICS paper that was written about, 15 years ago. And what they said was that India was a severe underperformer. Narayan alluded to the so-called Hindu rate of growth, which is, basically a racist and demeaning statement. In fact, it was I would say, the Congress rate of growth, okay? Because the moment the Congress left the stage, things started improving. Why is that? Because I think the Congress were essentially an ally of the West, which was looking to keep India down. So there is this big, outsider perspective that we cannot let go of. And a lot of this manufactured anti-Hindu stuff is coming from that angle. The other part of it is that, you don't want to be, you want to be very careful about saying anything against Islam. And in your country, you got this new Islamophobia bill and so forth, right? Because Muslims will react and retaliate. You can say anything about Hindus, and it's well known that Hindus at most will yell at you. They'll abuse you online or something. Al-Biruni said this, 1,000 years ago or something. He said, Hindus never take up arms to defend their religion. They'll just laugh at you if you abuse them. So that's also a reason why these people get away with it. And the third point, I'll stop now, is the US media, especially, say the New York Times or the Economist, not only US, but Western media, Economist, the Financial Times, and latest is this NPR. These people come to India and they publish the most outrageous and unrealistic and completely false data and information about India, and it's not challenged. Okay, so the government is at fault in this. They should just sue some of these people, for example, and kick them out as Singapore used to do. So I'm going to stop now.
No, not at all, not at all. It was
Anjali, if I can come in. Anjali, if I can come in,
please.
What strikes me listening to Rajeev is that, and I have been writing on that, is that the qualities that are actually our positives, let's say inclusivity, sensitivity amongst the Hindus, the ability to empathize with others, then the fact that we are such a diverse country, these are actually positives. We have so much of variety in our country, but these are being exploited by others. And that is the sad part. And India should, our diplomats and our government should be, I'm sure they're aware of it. They should take action on that. It should not. And most important, our democracy and free society, open society, anyone can come. The media can criticize anyone. That cannot happen in many of the other countries. So that is what is being taken advantage of, and we are probably having to pay for it. So the successes that we are having now, they are not looked at positively. The good effort that we have made in vaccinating people, in infrastructure, water supply, power, road, national highway. You won't believe it. In the last 5 years or 6 years, we have constructed as much extent of roads, as many kilometers of national highway as we had done in the first 60 years after independence. So you see, now that the delivery is improving, there are some people and some countries who are not happy about it. But I think we should just take it in our stride and ignore them.
I agree. And the pity is that a lot of these people reside within India. And India has given them a lot of opportunities, but at the same time, they don't hesitate to write anything negative about India, and it just shocks me to see what is out there in the Western media, and which is written by some of our very eminent Indian citizens.
Anjali, if I think about it, the attack is, as Rajeev says, it's deliberate and is well thought out, and it takes some of the following. So they are turning the positives against us, against Indians. And the way it is done is to say that, oh yes, Hinduism is so tolerant, Indians are so tolerant, and they consider all religions to be fine. They should, because they have begun to see that other religions are much better. But there are these some extremists, the nationalists or the extremists, and they are curtailing the freedom. Basically, they're curtailing the freedom of others to come and take over India, and that's the main fault there. But they equate the nationalists, and this is where it gets very, very bad. They equate the nationalists to the Nazis in post World War One and pre World War Two
Very
Germany. And that of course gets tremendous resonance because everybody knows the Nazis were bad, and you cannot illegal and criminal to say anything good about them. But if you think carefully about it, and I'm not defending the Nazis by any means, but the extremism rose and became accepted in Germany precisely because the country had been totally destroyed. Their economy was totally destroyed. They were blockaded. They were starved. And they got to the point where people just were driven, they had hyperinflation, everybody's wealth was gone. They were just rendered so desperate that they were ripe for takeover by somebody with very, very extreme views. So this tells me that that is what these people want happening in India. It's on the other hand, a country that becomes to turn extremist. People are just too busy making money and finding productive employment. They don't have time to hate others. That's as they say in Atlanta. It's a city that's too busy to hate, and that's what has actually made Atlanta survive in the southeast among places that are not so good. So this is really a malicious, very malicious, well thought out, if you can call something that malicious well thought out, but very deliberate attack on India. And that has to be faced. And Indians particularly have to understand that this is what is being done to them. And they only have to look at the former Eastern Europe, Yugoslavia, Africa, and places like strong nationalist entity ruling the country.
Absolutely, I agree with you. And you mentioned that people are too busy trying to find jobs, trying to earn money, trying to better their lives. So, this question, maybe I can direct it to you, Rajeev ji, that at a global level, how do you place the Indian economy? I mean, we heard about the pandemic that, it has indeed been the cause for a major blip. But if we assume that the health issues are now settling down, do you find the projected figures for growth reasonable for India?
Let me answer it in two slightly different ways. One is that, yes, the economy was hurt as a result of the pandemic. I think we had a significant, downturn in GDP, but we have come roaring back. India's GDP is back at the same trajectory it was at before the pandemic. So that's positive. And more impressively, I think both the World Bank and the IMF have now said that India is going to be the fastest growing large economy over the next couple of years. And this may in fact go beyond that. 9.2 or something is what they're saying. 9.2% improvement in GDP is what they're projecting. Now, this has a couple of reasons behind it. One is that the macroeconomic issues that we talked about, we touched upon. One is the fact that we have some of the youngest demographics in the world. I think the average Indian is somewhere around 28 years in age. Okay, that means they're going to be productive for the next, 35, 40 years. And if the infrastructure improves and their job prospects improve, then they will not only be producers, but they'll also be consumers, which means that everybody in the rest of the world is looking at India as a market. Okay, so that's something we need to take advantage of instead of letting them pillage and rape us like the East India Company did all those years ago. We need to be able to help our own people develop their own solutions. And there are a couple of reasons for optimism there. One is, we were talking about technology a little while ago. One of the things I wanted to mention, but I kind of got diverted from, was the idea of the electronic payments. In November, it is October and November, we had $100 billion plus that were being transmitted through our mobile and electronic payment mechanism. Now, this is very large, and our transactions, as I think Nivedita ji was saying, about 25 billion a month, is more than the next 3 or 4 countries put together. That's China, the US, the UK, etc. This is fantastic. And what this means is that technology is both robust and it has deep roots, and it's being adopted by everybody, right? Even down to the absolute grassroots levels. You can go to any small-time vendor and they'll have a QR code in front of them and you can pay 10 rupees. Okay, so, mobile money is displacing cash to a great extent. So that's positive. Now, the other really positive thing is that our growth is not coming on the back of massive money supply. Okay, unlike the US, which I'm sorry to say seems to have printed money by the boatload, which will naturally lead to the high rates of inflation that you see. Our inflation, by our historical measures, like between 2004 and 2014, under the last Congress government, our inflation rates, and I say this because I endured it after coming back from the US. I was living here, and the rates were like 12, 13% inflation a year, which is amazing. That means your money is depreciating very, very rapidly. But compared to those days, our rates about 5, 6% are not that bad. And a lot of it is due to sky-high energy prices, which means that on average, the Indian economy is looking good. And this is reflected, for example, in the exchange rate, okay? Because normally, as has happened before, whenever the Americans tighten up, the Fed has just talked about cutting down on quantitative easing and increasing rates there. The usual thing that happens is the Indian rupee just collapses, okay? It didn't happen this time. In fact, the Indian rupee hit a 3-month high of 73.9 on January 11th. What does this mean? It suggests that not only locals who are investing like mad, the stock market's done extremely well, but also external investors are seeing that the improved state finances from better tax collections and from, for example, getting rid of white elephants like Air India, and that money is going into infrastructure improvement. And the fact that this young and growing working class is going to be a consumption engine over the next foreseeable future, especially in comparison to people like the Chinese who are facing demographic disaster, right? All this is adding up to what I think is an inflection point for the Indian economy.
So let me just interject for a minute. You mentioned a lot. I don't know what happened. Rajeev ji, maybe he lost his power. But let me ask this question to you, Nivedita, that it is execution and implementation that are the hallmarks of a healthy democratic society, right? So do you believe that our public servants can deliver that?
Yes, I do believe they can, Anjali. They can. It's just that they need the push and the prying and the questioning eyes of the people. They need to be observing, asking questions, demanding. Why do you think in Kerala bureaucracy is more responsive? Because the people ask questions. And in UP and Bihar, they don't. But they have to learn to do that. And I think one of the best groups or people who can do it are the women. And I have a lot of hope on women in our country, including the ones in the Gangetic Belt, where women over the years have been really, really suffering. What I find is that when the women's groups get together, so what we call them the self-help groups, they are bringing about a huge change in our country, whether it is in Rajasthan, in Bihar, in parts of UP, as they have done in Andhra and in Kerala. That is, I think, a changing factor that will have an impact, long-term impact on India and its economy. Similarly, yeah, go on.
Sorry, just along the same lines, I just got reminded that in one of the previous conversations that I've had with you, I don't remember when, but you mentioned something called e-dose. Is it something which has got to do with helping these women particularly?
Yes, it's not just women. E-Dost is a very interesting project that we have started in Hyderabad and surrounding areas, in the peri-urban areas around Hyderabad. And now we are moving out to other small towns. What we do is, as part of a trust that it's a small company, not-for-profit company, which I'm part of, called COIN. What we are doing is we are training youngsters for a period of 3 months, and then sending them in technology, and with a smartphone in hand, we are sending them out to these areas where they help people to do digital transactions. So whether it is buying tickets, making purchases, making accessing their bank accounts, these youngsters are enabled to help the people to do it, and they get paid for it. It's a valid duty and a valid service they are performing. And it's been lapped up by the people, so much so that UP government now has approached us and said that they would like to replicate something like that in their area. And these youngsters are called e-ghosts. So I feel very happy that this is, it's a small change, but we need millions of such small changes to make a difference.
Absolutely, I think that is very good, and it's very heartening to know that all this is happening at a grassroots level, because we don't hear much of it. So, listening from you, it's like getting it straight from the horse's mouth. So, a person who has been there, done that, and it does make us feel. At least it makes me feel very comfortable and very proud that all these changes are happening. So you also mentioned something about the rural women and Manrega and the Ujjwala scheme. Maybe just in maybe a couple of sentences, you can just enlighten us a little bit more on that.
Yeah, I would like to mention the Ujjwala scheme specially because Rajeev had mentioned that initially. It's about giving cooking gas connection to rural women who until now were dependent on firewood. And firewood, as you know, has many problems. It has problems of causing pulmonary diseases especially amongst the women. They have to waste time. It leads to destruction of forest areas, surrounding forest areas, and it causes pollution. So this has been a very important, it has had a very important impact in the lives of the people who have got the LPG connection. And these are 22 million women who are living in the rural areas. And that has had a huge impact on their day-to-day life.
That's wonderful. So you're talking about firewood and all the forests that have been uprooted because of that. So that makes me think along the lines of climate change mitigation. So on one hand, we are doing climate change mitigation, and on the other hand, there is this green energy generation, right? So maybe you can answer this question, Narayanji, that what are your views on how well India will do in both weaning itself off the hydrocarbons and in meeting its growth ambitions? I mean, I'm not sure, but don't you think that these two seem contradictory?
So I believe that climate change is very real, and its effects can be seen in sea level rise and other things. So it's good to be doing something about it. But at the same time, I don't think India should, nor is India doing, totally believing the narrative as put out by certain countries about just reduce carbon, quit using coal, quit using this, quit using that, don't burn wood, etc., etc. Because those countries are the ones that are the major offenders. They have carbon footprints that are like 1,000 times that of Indians or Africans. So their advice is a little bit suspect. But let's get to the core of the need to reduce its dependence on imported energy, imported hydrocarbon, petroleum, etc., etc. So this is a great opportunity to do that. And this climate change initiative, the one good thing about that is they want to really move towards solar energy and using biogas, which decaying vegetation generates biogas, and slowly switch to hydrogen. And all of these have been adopted by India, which are tremendous positives. So they do help mitigate climate change, but not by cutting down on the use of coal, which is the most sensible fuel to use for Indian the economic progress for the immediate future. So I think this is tremendous. I think we're going to see clean streets, clean air, the cities with very little noise and pollution. All these things can come out of it. Power cuts. I'm surprised to hear Rajeev say that the power went off at his house because I thought we were over that. Because there's so much rooftop solar being generated in Kerala these days.
Yeah,
that is helped by this.
The reason I had a power failure is because the electricity guys were clearing brush and foliage from nearby, okay, which of course they kindly did not warn me about, so that it was a complete surprise to me. But so, the bureaucracy hasn't totally abandoned its old imperious ways, okay? So that was the reason I had a half hour. It was, in a way, a scheduled power failure. But, I also had to, I wanted to mention that I just blanked my video for a few minutes because I had to pick up an order of food that was delivered, okay? And the guy was at my door ringing the bell. But, I placed the order while sitting at my desk and I paid for it using my smartphone, all with, basically no hassle at all, right? And this is being done by lots and lots of people, especially during Corona times. So actually the use of technology is very widespread. And one more thing I wanted to mention about that is there's been a lot of excitement in engineering circles about the fact that the Indian government is now trying to put up a semiconductor fab. And I think this is great news, okay? Because fabs, semiconductors and chips underlie all the new technologies we're talking about. And it's a grave lacuna in our supply chain if we don't have that. And the government just announced these production incentives and so forth. They're talking about, enabling a fab to come in. So positive things are happening. I'm not by any means a Pollyanna saying everything is wonderful. There are lots and lots of problems, especially, political problems in India. You saw what happened in Punjab the other day, etc. But overall, I think, we're at a point where there is light at the end of the tunnel. That's the best way I can put it. Okay, things are actually looking not so bad.
Rajeev, while on that, I think it's a great pleasure to gloat at this. I don't know if you remember, but right after the demonetization was announced, Mr. Forbes, the billionaire, wrote in his magazine a very sharp article on how stupid all that was and how India shot itself in the foot and how it will never recover, etc., etc. I think that all those Indian media people who repeated that nonsense and said, "Oh, look, Forbes has said this," should actually be reminded of that and not allowed to forget. And that's one thing I hope to see, that a systematic program to remind people of the stupid predictions that they made, and at least to keep them from enjoying doing the same thing again.
So,
Anjali, you asked Narayananji about climate change, and I just want to butt in here and mention something, that if anyone should be concerned about climate change and disasters, it is India, because we are geographically so located, and with our dense population, and we are so prone to frequent natural disasters, that India is worried, and we are worried, and we have to find ways out of it. But the attitude that is sometimes taken, that it's all happening because the fault lies with India, is totally wrong. Because a lot of good things are happening here, and we as Indians also have to understand, as Gandhiji said, there's enough for everyone's need, but not for everyone's greed.
Great.
And often people, what they do, for instance, the example of urban floods. Floods have been happening regularly in Mumbai, Chennai, Delhi. It is happening because we are filling up our water bodies, because our the water drains are getting clogged by plastic. And these are things that we need to take care of.
I would say that really there is so much to learn from all of you, and but it's just that we are running a little bit out of time. But I have to admit that this was one of the most enlightening conversations that I have witnessed. So I would like to thank Rajeev ji, Narayanan ji, and Nivedita ji for being on our show and providing such telling evidence of the India that is indeed rising. So thank you so much for taking time out and coming on this show. And this is just the beginning, because I'm sure the audience would like to know a lot more from you. And thank you once again. And you have a wonderful day. Thank you. So, friends and viewers, in the end, I would like to confess that, I was very much concerned by the negativity in social and Western media and the news items, and by the demeaning and negative propaganda of India, especially by a section of frustrated Indians, if I may put it that way. But I will conclude with a confidence that no matter how much the dark clouds try to stop the rays of the rising sun at dawn, they will be dissipated. The dawn is at last here, and the bright light will envelop the world. The choice is ours, whether we want to side with negativity or with the sunshine of positivity. So, friends and viewers, I cannot choose on your behalf, but I can at least urge you to make wise and informed choices so that we do not add to the existing negativity. I am all for supporting and encouraging those who are still in dilemma, but my choice is clearly and obviously to side with the positive forces. So hail to the shining light of a rising Bharat. Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.